Hi, I'm Karen. We're here at Montevilla Sewing Center, and we're talking about the Janome Skyline S5. In this video, we're going to talk about programming stitch pattern combinations using the touch screen. Now, when you are sewing with decorative patterns, the stitch or the foot that you're going to want to be using is foot F, and that's because most of these stitches up here have a lot of thread that they're putting into the stitch, and so the foot has a little bit of a channel underneath it to allow the stitches to flow right through. It's especially important on your lettering because you want your lettering to be nice and readable and even and not getting stuck on the foot, so that the foot F is what you want to have. Okay, so let's say we want to spell out baby and put a heart at the beginning and a heart at the end. Okay, now first of all I want to explain up here on the stitch chart, if you're using lettering, the letters join with just a single thread from one letter to the next letter. So when you're adding a decorative stitch, you also want to have it join at the baseline, not somewhere here in the middle like here or here. You want to have it on the baseline. Otherwise, what you're going to have is a stitch that kind of jogs over to the baseline again. So you want to have everything nice and neat and even. Okay, so we're going to start out going into mode 2. Now, so when you first turn on your machine, it's going to be in mode 1. So we want to go to mode 2, find the stitch that we want. I'm going to go with 50, right there, 50. Then we push M for memory. Now I can go into another mode at this point, and so say I wanted to spell baby. Okay, I'm going to go to mode 3, and the capital B is 1, 2. Always push M for memory afterwards. Lowercase a, 37, memory. Lowercase b, 38, memory. And lowercase y, 61, memory. Now I want to go back to mode 2, so I'm going to cycle through here until I get to mode 2 again, and then, let's see, we had 50, 50, memory. Now I only want to do this one time and not have it repeat. At this point, it would, because I have a decorative stitch at the end, at the end of that little heart, remember there was a heart at the beginning, it would start over, making another heart and another, spelling out the word baby. But we want to just stop at that point. So at this point, we're going to put in a 93. And that's a locking stitch. That's this little stitch over here. Make sure we do memory. Okay, I'm going to show you how that looks. And I'm using tearaway stabilizer. You want to have some sort of stabilizer when you're using this fabric that's kind of, well, it's quilting cotton, but it's not real thick and firm like canvas or denim would be. So we want to have a stabilizer behind that. It's going to make a lot nicer stitches. I'm using the knee lifter to lift that up. And at this point, I could just disconnect the foot control, push start, and away it goes. Makes the heart first. It says up here what stitch we're on. Now we're on stitch number 3, but of course you want to keep your eyes on the area where you're stitching. But for instance, if you stopped, it would show you where you are right there. I'm going to keep going to get to the very end here. See there? Because we had the locking stitch built in, it stopped at that point after it made the locking stitch. I can do the cutter button, take this out, and there we go. So this is how you would make a stitch combination with lettering and with decorative stitches. Now, I'm going to reconnect this right over here because I want to be able to use my foot control. So let's say I want to delete that. I could either go clear one at a time. Actually, you have to use the arrow key. You have to have your that blinking, the cursor blinking underneath there. Okay, so, and I did that by touching the arrow key. So I could delete it one at a time if I wanted to, or I could just press and hold. Again, remember, when you're using the stylus, don't press harder if it doesn't respond right away, just press a little bit longer. Okay, so now you can also use the mirror key to have an interesting effect, and I'll just show this, explain it by showing it to you. Let's go with 80, do memory, and then we're going to do 80 again, and this time I'm going to do the mirror key. So, and then I do memory, that's important. Now I'm going to go back here. Stitch number 1 is the first one. Go forward, stitch number 2, and you can see that's the little memory symbol. So what this is going to look like, it's a kind of a fun way to change up your stitches. Because I did not put a locking stitch at the end, it's just going to keep stitching. Now I'm going to push this, and what it's going to do is finish the stitch cycle of that particular stitch, and then it will do the locking stitch. Here we go. Okay. And here we have the same stitch, but it's turned over. Now this works really well for stitches that join right here in the middle. If you had a stitch that had, say, a base line to it, like one of these stitches, and then you turned one of them over, there would be a stitch going all the way across to the other side to where the base line is on the opposite side. So keep that in mind. There are, you know, several of these stitches that work well for this. Stitch number 62 is an example, and that's one where it has hearts, but it's like they're hanging, like one heart this way. You could flip it over, have the other heart this way, and it kind of goes in a little serpentine. It's really a cute stitch. Okay, so I'm going to clear that out, and then I'm going to show you about, well, one thing to keep in mind is if you wanted to go back to, say, something in mode 1, yes, you could push this here, but then everything that you have programmed in there is now erased. So if you are in mode, say, 3, and you wanted to go back to one of the stitches in mode 1, keep pressing mode until you get back to 1. Don't use the direct select keys for that, for programming. Mode 1, you'll notice that also has a locking stitch that you can program in. And then this little square here is also in mode 3. In fact, I think it's in all of the modes. That is a space. I can have a space between one stitch pattern that you put in and the next stitch. So you can elongate things a little bit better. That's especially useful if you're doing lettering and you want to do, say, a first name and a last name. You can have a single stitch between the first name and last name. And I usually use the center middle. There's a really narrow one, say like if you're spelling out Janome Skyline S5. Well, Janome, and then you'd have the space, maybe 98, that would be good. And then Skyline and another space, but S, you might have the smaller space, 97, between the S and the 5. So that's, you kind of customize it a little bit more for you. There's also a way to make a space that connects stitches that don't have just a base line like the lettering does, but has one more in the middle. And that's where you would use like stitch number 37. So from 37 through 41, those are called bridge stitches. They form a bridge between one stitch pattern and the next. Now, 39 is for if there's a stitch pattern that doesn't join exactly in the middle. Maybe it's a little bit off of center one way or the other. That little arrow that goes both ways means it will adjust to be where it needs to be. The number next to it means that'll put one stitch in. That's 37 is for middle of the road stitches, where they join in the middle, like this heart. Stitch number 38 will be a baseline stitch, like from 1 to 2 that they would join in a baseline if you wanted a little bit wider stitch there. And that they both only give you 1 stitch, and the stitch that changes depending on where it joins, gives you 2 stitches there. And then 40 and 41 are the same idea, but they have that extra little, it's like a triple stitch in there. So if you have like a stitch that has a lot of stitches and you want that join stitch to really speak, to really show, then you would use one of these stitches that's a triple stitch. It's kind of similar to your stitch 09 in mode 1. I'm going to go back there and I'm going to show you what 09 looks like. That's something I really haven't shown you yet. The 09 stitch is a triple stretch stitch, and I'm going to slow it way down so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So when you have woven fabric, the woven fabric doesn't have much stretch on the grain, but on the diagonal it has a lot of stretch. So I'm going to just get into that. Okay, now I'm going to go slow so you can see what it does. It takes 2 stitches forward and then 1 stitch back. So backwards, forwards, forwards. Let's just go right down to here. So if you're doing decorative stitching and you want to have a bridge stitch or 2, you can put that in there and it's going to give you that extra stitch in there. So see how nice and bold that is? Okay, great. So that is basically your stitches. Of course, you can do Cyrillic down here, which is Russian, or any of your European or Scandinavian lettering. But most of the time, I just use my mode 6 and my mode 3, and that seems to work just fine. Now, mode 6 doesn't have lowercase letters. You can just use a capital in mode 6 and a lowercase in mode 3 if you want, or you can do it all in mode 3. That works just fine. Okay, so that is your basic programming of your stitches. When you're all done, you push the clear key. Oh, yes, I should show you something else. If you did, I'm going to go to mode 3. Let's say we were trying to spell something and we misspelled something. I'm going to go A, memory, B, memory, and uh-oh, I didn't mean to spell it that way. And so I would move the cursor under the one I want, delete that, and then I would put the stitch that I want. And I'm going to move this cursor back because if you leave it under there, it will actually put it between the A and the B. So I want to move the cursor to where I want it to be, and then I have a C right there. If you want to check that, you can always check your stitches by going back and forth like this. Now that beep, beep, beep you hear, that means you can't go any further that way. Another thing is I've noticed that when you put ABC, let's say D, let's put that there. I'm going to put D in here and I go memory. And I want to put additional letters. I can just do memory. Let's clear that out. Yeah. Press and hold. There we go. This is basically for these 2 arrows are basically for finding where you are, moving that cursor so you can change, or in the case of making it wider or longer, adjusting that stitch. Like if you had a decorative stitch you wanted to make it a little bit shorter. So you can have like a heart that's big, a heart that's small, and of course test it out on your fabric sample. Now I wanted to show you this. Okay, if you're using this kind of fabric, I'm going to show you the difference between sewing with a stabilizer and sewing without. Let's go with one of these here. I'm going to go with 70 in mode 1. Get back to mode 1. Okay, 70. Now I'm not memorizing stitches, so going back to 70 would be just fine. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit under here. So I'm going to start out sewing. And then I'm going to sew onto the stabilizer, and you can see the difference between that. Now I pushed the locking stitch key while it was in the middle of sewing that stitch number 70, and that made it stop at the end of that stitch. If I had pushed the reverse key, it would have just stopped right in the middle of the stitch and done the locking stitch. The thing about that, though, the reason why I would want to do that is maybe I didn't want to sew off the edge of my fabric. Okay, so here we go. So you can see pretty well here. See how nice and flat these are? That's because I used the tearaway stabilizer. And these are a little bit scrunched up because I didn't have any stabilizer on the back. And the stabilizer, make sure you get tearaway, because then you can grab your stitches, just tear that off. It will still stay underneath the stitches, which is fine, because in washing your garment, you want to have that extra little stabilizer in there to help keep those stitches nice and flat. So I believe that's all we have about stitch programming. If this video was helpful to you, give us a thumbs up. And if you have comments or questions, you can leave them in the area below. We have a lot of other videos on this machine, the Skyline S5, and on other machines that we have here at the store. So take a look at what else we have. Stay tuned. Happy sewing. We'll see you later. Bye.